What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and it's time to take a look at the top 10 toughest schedules for the upcoming 2022 college football season. I've been doing this for several years now, and really looking at these 10 schedules, they're not as tough as some of the top 10 schedules we've had in the past. There are some very tough schedules again this year, but not as bad as maybe we have had in previous seasons, which is interesting. Another thing that's probably going to stand out is we're not going to have any teams from the Big Ten or the Big 12 in this list. Indiana was close out of the Big Ten, and then out of the Big 12, Texas Tech was really close, but those two teams not quite making the cut. So all of the teams here on our top 10 schedules come from the SEC, the ACC, or from the Pac-12. And it's interesting that the SEC and the ACC really make up the majority of this list because they only play 8 conference games, but it's those teams that have 8 conference games and then maybe 2 tough non-conference teams, or maybe even 3. Those are going to be your toughest schedules, and I just use a point system. I have a point system that I use. I plug in the numbers and get the top 10 schedules. It's not like I'm just looking at them saying, that looks like a tougher schedule than that one. I have a system that I use to do these rankings. I do it this way every year, and this is how it came out. So we'll start with number 10, and that is Louisville. Louisville comes in at number 10, the 10th toughest schedule in all of college football. You look at who they play in the non-conference. They do have UCF on the road. They also will play Kentucky on the road at the end of the season. So 2 pretty tough games there in the non-conference. They play Pittsburgh out of the Coastal Division. That's going to be maybe the best team in that division. I think it's between Pitt and Miami. So again, not a terribly tough schedule here, but it was high enough on the score to where they made it in the top 10. And like I said, we just didn't have a ton of really tough schedules this year. Moving on to number 9, we've got LSU. LSU has a pretty tough schedule. Anytime you play in the SEC West, that alone is going to make it a tough schedule. And then they'll play Florida out of the East and also Tennessee. So 2 of the mid-tier teams out of the East, possibly the second and third best teams out of that division. I think Kentucky in that argument, maybe even South Carolina. But yeah, you're talking about 2 quality teams out of the East. They have to run through the SEC West. And then you have Florida State, a team that I think is borderline a top 25 team this year. They will play them in the non-conference as well. So again, not a horrible schedule. They also have UAB, who's a pretty good group of 5 team, but not a horrible schedule, but it was tough enough to make it into the top 10. Number 8 is Syracuse. Syracuse in the non-conference with a couple of tough games. They'll play Purdue, who I think is among the top teams in the Big Ten West. They'll play them, and then they will also play Notre Dame in the non-conference. So you're talking about 2 really tough non-conference games there. And then you look at who they play out of the Coastal Division. They also will play Pittsburgh. They'll play them on the road, and they'll play Virginia, who's probably middle of the pack there in the Coastal Division. They have Clemson on the road, and home and away does factor into this. I have a point system that I use, and the home field advantage does play into that. So I'm looking at where the games are played as well. And Syracuse, Purdue, and Notre Dame, 2 tough games there in the non-conference. Moving on to number 7, Florida. Florida has a pretty tough schedule here. You see they open up with Utah, and then they also have to play Florida State, which they play every year. So you're talking about 2 quality non-conference games. Utah, top 10 team in the preseason, more than likely. And that makes for a tough schedule. They also play LSU and Texas A&M out of the West. So I'm just looking at this schedule, and I'm thinking, why was Florida not higher on this list? But again, it just kind of came out how it came out. I mean, there are still some easier games here on the schedule. USF, Eastern Washington, Missouri, maybe. South Carolina's at home. Vanderbilt on the road. So this is a tough schedule. And I think now that we're into the top 7, you're starting to see these schedules get a little bit tougher. And Florida is right there at number 7. Number 6, we've got Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt. So one of the things that when you do these schedule rankings, one of the things that you have to look at is the fact that Vanderbilt's the worst team in the SEC, which means they don't get to play Vanderbilt compared to some, like Florida gets to play Vanderbilt. They get an easy win against Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt does not get that easy win. And also, they play Alabama out of the SEC West, also Ole Miss, who I've got as a top 15 team this year. They play Wake Forest in the non-conference. Northern Illinois, not an easy game either out of the MAC, playing them on the road. So, yeah, this schedule, the big thing about this schedule is the fact that they have to play Alabama and Ole Miss out of the West. Very tough draw out of the West. Non-conference schedule isn't brutal, but they do play Wake Forest, who I have as a top 15, top 20 team this year, and that puts Vanderbilt just ahead of Florida. But if you took Vanderbilt, if Florida played Florida and Vanderbilt played Vanderbilt, then Florida would probably have a tougher schedule than Vanderbilt. Hopefully that makes sense. But the fact that Vanderbilt doesn't get to play Vanderbilt, I think that's probably why they wound up at 6. Moving on to the top 5. Number 5 is Arkansas. Arkansas, an interesting schedule here in the non-conference. They don't play a Power 5 team, but they'll play Cincinnati, who of course was a playoff team last year, and then they'll play at BYU, who is a team that's expected to be a top 15 team, I think, from a lot of people. They also play Liberty. I know Malik Willis is gone, but Liberty should still probably be a pretty good team. And so that's a very interesting non-conference schedule. It's not like they're playing a Clemson or an Ohio State, but still, that's a tough non-conference schedule. Then, of course, you play through all of the SEC West. Their games against the East, not as bad. South Carolina and Missouri. So they don't play Georgia. They don't play Kentucky. That is what keeps this schedule from being just absolutely brutal. It is a very, very tough schedule, but getting that draw of Missouri and South Carolina out of the East, that makes the schedule a little bit easier for Arkansas. But still, this is a very tough schedule. Moving on to number 4, Mississippi State. Mississippi State going to play Memphis, and they're going to play Arizona in the non-conference. They'll play Kentucky, and they'll play Georgia. So, again, it's all about that draw from the East. Kentucky on the road, Georgia also. Then they have all of the SEC West. I mean, you can't really get – I think Kentucky's probably the second best team in the East. So it doesn't get any worse than that. Georgia and Kentucky out of the East. And then respectable games against Memphis and Arizona. Should be games Mississippi State can win. But still, this is a tough schedule. And it's all about that draw from the East. That's what makes it so tough for Mississippi State. Moving on to number 3, Stanford. Stanford comes in at number 3. You look at who they play in the non-conference. You see Notre Dame there on October the 15th on the road, and also BYU. So they have a very tough schedule there in the non-conference. And then you look at who they play out of the Pac-12 South. They've got USC, Utah, UCLA, and Arizona State. Probably the top 4 teams out of the Pac-12 South. I would say those will be the 4 top teams. So it doesn't get any worse when you look at their conference schedule. It couldn't be any worse. They've got all the teams in their division, the top 4 teams out of the Pac-12 South, and then you add in a game on the road at Notre Dame, a game against a top 15, top 20 BYU team. That makes for a very difficult schedule, but only number 3, because we've got 2 more that are even tougher than this one. And let's go now to number 2, Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech seems to always be near the top of this list. They might have been number 1 or number 2 last year. I think they might have been number 1, actually. I can't remember. But the thing about Georgia Tech is they have to play Georgia every year. They will play them in Athens, by the way. They'll play Georgia. And then their cross-division game is always Clemson. So they have to play Clemson every year along with all the teams in their division. Also, a non-conference game against UCF. Also, a non-conference game against Ole Miss. Are you kidding me? This is brutal. Once again, their other game against the ACC, as far as the Atlantic Division, is Florida State, who potentially could be the second, third, fourth best team out of that division. So this is a really tough schedule. The only thing that keeps this from being number 1, I think, is the fact that they play in the ACC. So you've got, Duke, Virginia Tech's down right now. North Carolina might be down from last year. But I'm just looking at all these games, and I'm trying to figure out how Georgia Tech did not get the toughest schedule, because this thing is rough. I mean, Clemson, starting with Clemson, ending with Georgia, very, very tough schedule. But it's not number 1. Again, with the point system that I use, the number 1 toughest schedule actually comes out to be the Auburn Tigers. Auburn with the toughest schedule in 2022, and they also seem to always have a really, really tough schedule. I think the difference with them and Georgia Tech is they've got some more easier non-conference wins here with Mercer. And, then again, when you look at their non-conference schedule, Mercer's really the only easy guaranteed type win. San Jose State's a pretty good team out of the Mountain West. Western Kentucky's a pretty good team out of Conference USA. You would think that those would be or I guess I can't even keep up with the conferences anymore. I guess they're still in Conference USA. I really need to study those conference realignments, by the way. Anyways, San Jose State, Western Kentucky, two pretty good group of 5 teams. Then they'll play Penn State, maybe a top 25 team out of the Big Ten. That's your non-conference schedule. Then they've got all of the SEC West, of course. And they'll play Georgia out of the East, and that's why this schedule is always tough. They have Georgia out of the East, and then also out of the East they get Missouri. So Missouri not quite as bad. It's not like Georgia and Kentucky, but still a really tough schedule. Like I said, when it comes down to Auburn and Georgia Tech, I think it really is probably just because Auburn's in the SEC. That's why their schedule came out a little bit tougher. Just kind of looking at the schedules, I would actually say Georgia Tech's might be tougher just because there are no breaks. I mean, their non-conference schedule definitely tougher, but they don't have to go through the SEC West like Auburn does. And I think at the end of the day, that is why the Auburn Tigers come out with the toughest schedule for 2022. What do you guys think? What do you think about these schedules? Maybe one of them is underrated. Maybe one of them is overrated. Maybe there's a schedule I didn't put on the video that you think might be tougher. Maybe I'm overlooking it or something. Give me your thoughts on these schedules down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports YouTube channel.